Welcome to Fintech Daydreaming, the podcast that dives into the world of banking technologies and the ever-changing landscape of fintech companies. We bring you real-life examples from global and local thought leaders, as well as experts working within the financial industry, and seek out the best stories from the front lines of financial services innovation, where dreams of industry pioneers meet reality. Hosted by Pål and Ville. This is Fintech Daydreaming.
Welcome back, everybody. Yet another episode of Fintech Daydreaming, the podcast that you all love to listen to. Well, I hope so anyway. Otherwise, I'd wonder why you're here and listening to us. So we'll assume you enjoy listening to us and hopefully some of the jokes and funny things we bring as well. But as always, we want to dive into the world of fintech and banking technology. I'm Pål Krogdahl. I'm going to be your host for this episode, and I promise you it's going to be an interesting one. But obviously, I cannot do this on my own. I sometimes have wondered if I can do many things on my own, and it always seems to end up having Ville involved there somehow or another. In actual fact, in a recent presentation that we did at Moby Forum, we're back to Moby Forum again, it came out that apparently Ville prefers cooking in my kitchen than his kitchen. So, Ville, what are you cooking for us tonight?
I think tonight, no cooking in a physical sense. Like we're going to be cooking a good conversation, I hope, but not in your kitchen either. But yeah, you're right. It seems to be we are running into each other all the time. So some people might have the perception that we cannot do anything alone. So yeah, let's see how this reputation kind of carries us out in the near future.
Yeah, we need to have a break. As Ross in Friends said, we need to go on a break.
Yeah.
We're showing our age here now, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yes.
We are indeed. Speaking of age, I have a birthday this week, so a bit of a celebration for me. So let's not disclose what date it is today, so the audience can keep on guessing when my actual birthday is, but still, it's getting close.
Well, happy birthday for when it comes anyway. But for this episode, Ville, we have skirted around the discussion of compliance and regulation quite a lot. I mean, it's something that tends to come up in our discussions when we're talking to fintechs and we are talking to banking executives and everything else. We always tend to end up somewhere covering off, compliance. And I figured it was about time that we really got down into the weeds on this one, particularly as all these fintechs and neobanks out there are desperately trying to make a name for themselves and maybe potentially sometimes forget that we are working in a very heavily regulated industry. So I thought this time, let's talk to an expert, someone who knows an awful lot more than we do and spends her time helping fintechs and other technology companies in understanding this space. So Eva-Lotta, it's fantastic to have you here with us. Why don't you share a little bit about your background and how you ended up in this space and what's your superpower?
Sure. Thank you, Pål, and thanks for the invite. Very happy to be here. I'm an attorney. I work as a senior associate at a law firm called Dittmar Indrenius. My background is in financial sector, where I used to work as an in-house lawyer for OP Financial Group on data and data protection matters. And I think that I still have those in-house counsel glasses on, so I can't really take off the internal company view. But substance-wise, I'm specialized in fintech-related regulation. So where data, tech, and financial sector meet, that's where the most interesting questions are, in my view.
So let's start off right in the details of this then. Regulation, compliance, the legal ramifications, are they the same for a fintech as they are for a large bank, or are there differences?
Actually, one more point, as you might guess from talking to a lawyer, all disclaimers apply. Ignore the text. My views here are purely my own and not my employers, not current or formers. But you asked about compliance differences for banks and fintechs.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Of course, we all know that we're in a very regulated field or business here. And well, the regulation is risk-based and has a principle of proportionality. So as a fintech, you have a bit more lenient obligations than the big players do.
Do you have any examples, that separates what a fintech maybe can be a little bit more relaxed about than a potential large bank?
Well, of course, depends on your business, but for example, DORA has, we have probably all heard about the Digital Operational Resilience Act coming into force soon. So that has more stringent requirements on banks and other bigger institutions compared to fintechs. But you might, of course, be not exactly in the scope, but get to comply with DORA obligations because of a cooperation with a bank.
So when does a fintech stop being a fintech? In a fairly recent news, we heard from the UK that Starling Bank was just fined, I believe, more than £20 million for compliance breaches on certain topics. I don't remember by heart exactly what. I think it was related to some onboarding of customers of high risk, which was supposed to be restricted or something like that. And Starling, has been obviously a very fast growing digital bank for a long time, of course, considered like a fintech darling, even though it's a fully licensed bank. And suddenly we get news from a superstar bank like Starling. So again, coming back to the question, how do fintechs grow when they do grow, and when do they kind of become closer to being a regular kind of a regulated bank almost? And have you been witnessing any of journeys like that during your time being a compliance lawyer?
Many good points there. I think that in the Finnish market, it will take quite some time for a small startup to grow into an actual big financial institution. It's of course also a question of terminology. What do you include or count as a fintech? Is regtech fintech? Is insurtech fintech? Like the scope, but company-wise, I think it's a matter of licensing and knowing the regulations that apply to you. So as your business evolves, you need to keep up to date with the regulations that apply to you. So monitoring your business and the regulation as well is crucial.
So I've got to admit, Ville and I have discussed on multiple occasions this whole idea of turning our little podcast into a bank by itself, Fintech Daydreaming Bank. And if I was to sit there as a startup entrepreneur, I think compliance it's going to be relevant to me, but it's going to be the last thing on my mind. The first thing on my mind is going to be trying to build a revenue stream, etc. So when you're working with these fintechs, what tends to be the main things that they are focused on, and where you help them and guide them?
Well, for startups and fintechs in a broader sense, usually business is number one where they have their attention on, but it of course depends on the solution and on your market. If you're offer cross-border services or mainly operate in one market, but do you mean substance-wise or?
I think I mean both. I'm trying to understand the life of a fintech who engages with you, how do you help them? What is it that they are most concerned about? Because regulation compliance, it's a big domain. It's a scary domain. There's an awful lot going on. There's an awful lot of new regulations. I can see fintechs rapidly drowning in all of that.
Usually, smaller companies tend to have specific questions, smaller ones relating to the product and business. For example, data protection. That's a really common topic, as every business seems to be a data-heavy business today. Also, financing rounds, cybersecurity are like the, I would say, key matters or questions coming from fintechs at the moment. And of course, new regulation, because, well, innovation leads, regulation follows, but you need to also follow the regulatory changes at the same time.
So do you work with them to look across the whole spectrum of what regulations are potentially relevant for them to look at? Or do they generally come to you and say, we are concerned about GDPR, or we're concerned about what the impact of this or that regulation is going to have on us?
For some companies, we do this monitoring of regulatory changes. So on a quarterly or half-year or yearly basis, reviewing all regulations, new ones and older ones that affect their business. And companies of each size have these specific picked out questions. For example, if you're developing a new solution for, I don't know, customer authentication or payments, then there might be, or there definitely are, specific data protection questions applying there. Or licensing is actually one very, very common topic. Companies that want to come to the Finnish market need to find out what licensing requirements apply to them and their business.
That's actually an interesting perspective here. Are most of the people or companies, fintechs that you are supporting and guiding, are they Finnish fintechs, or are they external non-Finnish fintechs trying to get into the Finnish market?
I would say that we mostly have international clients in this field.
That's actually
and maybe
really...
the Finnish fintech market isn't that big compared to some other countries. So
it's actually interesting, Ville. We had this discussion with Janna on one of our Nordic fintech highlights episodes, where we actually talked about a lot of Finnish fintechs or Nordic fintechs trying to grow internationally, compared to how many international fintechs from the US or somewhere else are trying to get into Finland.
Yeah.
Janna sort of had the opposite perspective, so it's interesting, Eva-Lotta, to get this sort of perspective from you as well.
It is indeed, because I was about to go on this. So how do fintechs grow out of Finland and or from the region, and how does that growth journey look like? But now I'm curious to hear about these international fintechs coming into this region, and even specifically Finland, and then you helping them out with the regulation here locally. So if that's the case, what are the kind of usual things that maybe the fintechs coming into this region don't necessarily understand to the extent that they should, and you're helping them with them?
Well, definitely Finnish or Finland-specific regulation. For example, employee privacy in Finland is a lot stricter than in many other countries. So that's something to pay attention to. And now we have this new positive credit register, for example. That's, well, depends on your business, but might be relevant, and that the strong customer authentication system and regulation in Finland differs a lot from other EU countries. We have our own network for that, as you know. So those are maybe the top differences market-wise.
But I want to delve back into to your perspective here and your passions. But why fintech? Why have you decided to focus down on supporting fintechs around this compliance nightmare rather than the big banks?
That's a good question, and of course we have a lot of big banks as our customers also, and similar regulatory landscape there. But as a lawyer, maybe I've always somehow been drawn to the finance sector, and well, firstly, technology and data and innovation are my passion, and I think that this sector is it's heavily regulated, but it also has the most interesting questions and innovation, and something that we really can't live without, can we? So
no, absolutely not.
Maybe that's why.
No, absolutely. But I'm wondering also, you're focusing in on the banking industry, but when we're looking at regulations around data particularly, and there are a number of other regulated industries as well, does the banking industry single itself out substantially when it comes to data regulations, or are they quite common across all the regulated industries in Finland?
I would say that financial and health industry and telecom are the most heavily regulated when it comes to data, but still I would say that the finance sector, fintech, is the number one in the amount of data regulation. If you start to think about the services like customer authentication, payment services, knowing your customers, KYC, etc., there's data involved in everything, and that data is regulated. So
there is a growing trend of regtech providers out there that are helping to streamline this and make it easier for banks and any financial institutions. Do you see yourself as sitting in that regtech space, or do you see them as a separate track to what you're doing?
I think that regtech can be a useful tool for ensuring compliance, but to be able to use that regtech or buy a regtech solution, you need to be aware of what obligations apply to you and what kind of a regtech solution would suit you. So one size fits no one, and there is this investment of time and thought at least before getting one of those solutions. And of course they are constantly developing, so maybe there will be some more comprehensive solutions out there, but already today we have solutions where you can, for example, map your GDPR and DORA compliance at the same time and choose different panels for whatever suits your business. And as a smaller, very small company, I maybe wouldn't yet purchase a regtech solution, because that probably wouldn't suit your business in 2 years, or at least make sure that the solution grows with your business. But also there are some compliance matters that I really wouldn't like to do on Excel, like GDPR, requires this record of processing activities. It's basically data mapping all your personal data flows. But if you have software for that, you can easily update it and link it to your software structure. So that's one field where I would recommend such a solution.
So RegTech implies into automation or making compliance processes more efficient, or regulatory compliance in general. How do you see the evolution of automation and technology in this compliance space in general? I mean, obviously starting from nothing, and now we have a lot of solutions in the market. Are we heading into a space where lawyers and people, compliance lawyers, have a smaller and smaller, maybe even non-existent part of this in the future? Or how do you see this progressing? Are we going to hit like a ceiling in the automation sometime soon?
Definitely not. I think that these solutions will make our work easier. So we can use our time and thought on the questions that are really like complex and only related to like very limited situations. So I really think that these are a useful tool to organize everyone's work and compliance a bit better and make our work more efficient. But I'm not afraid of being out of job soon, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I think some time ago, the blockchain enthusiasts were saying that because we have smart contracts, which are neither smart or contracts, we don't need lawyers anymore for some reason. When that kind of went away, then we had ChatGPT coming along, and now for a very short period of time, people were saying, well, now we can replace lawyers with chatbots. Of course, we all know that that's not true, but there's always this funny when there's new kind of technology coming into this space, especially about agreeing about principles between different entities and people, whether that is smart contracts or negotiating chatbots. There's always this short moment in time when everybody was saying that finally we can get rid of the lawyers, but I tend to agree with you. They give the same treatment to bankers quite constantly. So.
Yeah, and it goes in these waves. We had AI spring already during the 80s, and I'm very interested to see where this new wave of AI innovation and regulation takes us now. But
exploring on that a little bit more, actually, Ville, or both of you, I agree that to me, from a compliance or regulation perspective, a legal counsel or a lawyer, to me, satisfies two different things. The one is make sure that you are compliant. And yes, you can use tools for that, and you can get the smart contract or whatever else you want to point to that helps you to stay compliant. The other side of this, the other side of the coin is when shit hits the fan. And you need to deal with the consequences of that. That's when you really need the lawyer. That's when you need the human being that understands how to actually, rectify some of the impact of what's gone wrong and minimize the impact on your organization and your brand and your reputation and everything else. So I would assume from your perspective there, potentially the more interesting work is what happens when things go wrong, rather than just telling a fintech, this is what you need to look at.
Definitely, very good point there. And we can see an increase in, for example, data protection litigation or other authority discussions where legal services and lawyers can be of help.
So with that in mind, I sort of wonder, is compliance basically just a cost, or can it be used for a competitive advantage as well for the fintechs?
Glad that you brought this one out, since I actually, especially back in my in-house counsel times, used to hear that quite a lot. If any of the listeners still thinks that way, you really need to broaden your best perspective. here's why and how. You guys are probably the expert in managing technical debt. We all know what that means, and no company wants to take that unless they really have to, right? There are different market situations, mergers, other interests that make you grow your technical debt. And from a regulatory perspective, I see being compliant or being non-compliant as taking compliance debt. So that's something that will hamper your revenue in the future and bring even bigger costs for you later on. So you wouldn't implement legacy software unless you really have to, because you, I don't know, bought a company that has legacy on board or something like that. But same applies to compliance. So you should try to be compliant because that's also an investment and strategic advantage. And we also have data to show that, for example, sustainable investments are or tend to be more profitable than unsustainable. So I would also apply this to being compliant, not only being sustainable, but also providing sustainable and compliant financial services.
So reading between the lines, what I'm hearing is, as a fintech, it might cost me to be compliant, but the cost of being compliant is a lot less than the cost of not being compliant in the long run. So therefore, it's a competitive advantage.
Definitely. You both work in Finland, so you have probably heard the saying that it's easier to say that I'm sorry than to ask for permission. So I wouldn't really apply this to the financial sector, because saying sorry might have a price tag on it. It's called an administrative fine. So in that sense, it's good to be or follow the regulations, but also from the point of revenue and being a good partner to get more cooperations with bigger players. So that's also one view or way to see it.
Two things come to mind from that. First of all, I've heard the exact same expression about that compliance. It's better to take it into account in the beginning rather than as an afterthought, because it's going to be so expensive. The same applies for user experience as well. At least I've heard that talked about many times. If you take user experience into account from day one in designing your product, then that's going to be much cheaper for you than trying to figure it out later on. So interesting parallel there. Maybe there's this kind of compliance experience or compliance user experience is something that we should invent as a new term here. The second one is that the notion of asking for forgiveness rather than permission is interesting, because there's also the component of scale in this conversation. As we witnessed, for example, in the crypto space, which remained under-regulated, still is under-supervised to large extents, grow into fairly significant amount of volume without having any kind of compliance activities by design. Now they're trying to retrofit the compliance and supervision into that space, and it's proving to be difficult because many of these actors are already so big. They're kind of difficult to bring to bear in terms of compliance. So it's definitely going to be expensive for everybody to let something grow too big and then try to create compliance afterwards. So it's an interesting thought. Also linking to the Starling story as well. I'm sure and know that Starling had great compliance controls in place, but they grew maybe faster than they thought, and they weren't able to scale compliance activities and monitoring and risk awareness and compliance culture in general. Perhaps, again, we don't know the details of what exactly happened there, but it surely sounds like a case of having started somewhere and then growing maybe faster than they thought, and then they couldn't keep up with these activities.
There is also another element to this. I was just thinking back to you saying about, yeah, if you're not compliant, you could end up with a fine. But in the banking industry, the executives can actually end up in jail if they don't manage to stay compliant. There's always the risk that you're held personally accountable for the outcomes and therefore end up in jail. Is that a risk that the fintechs could face as well? Do the fintechs appreciate this, that in a heavily regulated industry like banking, there is always the possibility of ending up in jail?
I don't think that it's something that fintechs have in mind every day. And also one point to keep in mind is that as an extreme outcome, you might also lose your license if your business requires one, and that can also happen to fintechs, and not only to the bigger players who actually tend to have more enhanced processes for being compliant and keeping up with the new regulations.
So do you find that the fintechs generally are a little bit more blasé about the whole compliance area and see it more as an afterthought than you believe they should?
It differs a lot, I think, and that's what also has an effect on how your business and innovation will succeed. Because what's the use of an innovation if it's very uncompliant? So you can't really, for example, sell such a startup or get a good revenue from it.
So what do you recommend to a fintech? Like I said, Ville and I, we're going to start our little fintech here, Fintech Daydreaming. What's your recommendations from day one? What should we be doing? What should we be looking at? And how can you help us and guide us?
Well, firstly, I would recommend you to find a good legal partner. As in business, everyone should concentrate on what they do the best. But I, of course, understand that the resources of fintechs and startups are very limited. And in every case, you should also try to have some legal experience or knowledge also in your own team, your internal team, for example, in coders or other technical people. And if you want to or choose to do compliance more independently, you should keep an eye on the regulatory changes. And for example, no EU regulations just appear overnight. It takes years to prepare those, and there are transition times when they start to apply, etc. So it's not something that you have to do every day, but monthly or on a quarterly basis.
But I suppose it's actually easier and simpler to take advantage of someone like yourself to help us to keep an eye on the pending and future regulations and how they're going to impact us, rather than us trying to run around and check all the resources.
Definitely. And well, there is maybe reason why we have lawyers. So you couldn't answer all the questions yourself, and we have a good view of the whole market and different players and different regulation. But it's understandable that you have also limitations budget-wise, etc. But that's also just a matter of negotiation and scoping.
Interesting, very practical question here. So let's presume that we're starting maybe not a bank, but any licensed fintech business, so a PSP, e-money provider, maybe even a bank, as a kind of a from the scratch startup kind of a setup. How soon do you think a company like that needs its own chief compliance officer or an in-house lawyer who understands the related compliance issues? How far can you go with just external help, and when do you recommend that they establish their own compliance function?
If you are a licensed business or your business requires a license or a notification, or you're aiming for one, well, when you're aiming for one, I think you can still rely on external help. But once you get that license and your business going, I think that's a good time to at least start looking for your own legal and compliance counsel.
So technically you can get at least some of the licenses you can get, even if you're just relying on external help. So it's not regulated or mandated to have your own in-house lawyer. Is that right?
Actually, if you are aiming for a license as a bank, there is regulation or on risk management and compliance, and even for management, like what kind of skills and education your management needs to have. So in that field, at least, you need to do it a lot sooner.
You're right. The banks are a bit of a chapter of their own, because there's a lot of in-house competence that they need.
Yeah, and same goes for insurance, for example.
Yeah, that's true. But at least for some of the licenses, so some of the call it lighter weight licenses, like a payment service provider, maybe you can actually go quite far with just external compliance department.
Yeah, and I have never actually looked into this exact questions, and if there are like some, where is it regulated and where not when it comes to smaller players. But also, if you find a good legal partner, that can be, of course, we are lawyers and attorneys are external help, but if you have a good communication and implement the external help as part of your own team, then you can go quite far.
So let's take a view going forwards for the sort of remaining part of this episode. The first thing that I would sort of be interested in understanding is what's coming down the line. If I'm a fintech and I'm starting to get focus on how I need to be compliant, from your perspective, what are the big things that are coming that the fintechs really should be keeping an eye on?
Fintechs, I would again like to say that one size fits no one, but DORA and AI Act are what's the hot topic in fintech regulation at the moment. So that's definitely something you should keep an eye on. And if you are in the business of crypto, then MiCA will be applied from the turn of the year, or fully applicable from the beginning of next year. But cybersecurity regulation in general and digital operational resilience is something that I would focus on as a new regulation.
Is GDPR still a big hot potato, or has that become business as usual these days?
I think it's a process nowadays.
Right.
So mainly business as usual, but for new players, it's of course something to get a hang on.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, I think this has been a really good and interesting discussion. I've learned an awful lot, so thank you very much. One of the things that we like to do is to lighten the mood a little bit somewhere through the podcast. Ville does it at the beginning. I do it at the end. We like to pepper in a joke, and we always ask our guests if they potentially have a good but bad joke that they could share with us and our listeners. So have you brought a joke?
Yes, and of course it's a lawyer joke, bending the rules here, but you may call it a fintech lawyer trope. What do you call a priest that becomes a lawyer?
I have no idea.
Father-in-law.
Oh.
That was good. That was good. I appreciated that one. Yeah.
Good, you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It was very good. So, what's next for you? Anything interesting on the horizon?
Keeping up with the DORA and AI, and of course, sustainability regulation is one of these new fields, and really also looking forward to new regulation on open finance, but PSD3 and FIDA will still take maybe a few years to go forward, but
Yes.
keeping an eye on the regulatory changes and helping clients succeed.
The shift from PSD2 to PSD3 and PSR is going to be an interesting one, I think. So I agree with that. But if people want to know more, they want to find out more, get in touch with you and continue the discussion, how can they get in contact with you?
LinkedIn, for example, or from dittmar.fi, you can find my email and phone number and contact me directly if you want to discuss fintech or other regulation of the field. Would be happy to.
Great. Ville, any final thoughts, perspectives from you?
No, maybe I wanted to make a crypto joke when it was mentioned, but the moment passed. So for now.
That's okay. If people want to get in contact with you, Ville, how can they do that?
LinkedIn and also Threads. Still pending my first post, but it will happen one day, I promise. So LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Okay, and I would like to make just a small apology to our audience. Ville's audio has dropped halfway through, so I'll hope that I can fix that in post-production. If I don't, then I apologize for Ville's beautiful voice getting silent on you, but we'll fix it, I hope. If not, I apologize. But for us, we have had a very good discussion here today. You can find us on all the usual podcasting channels and on YouTube and everywhere else. You just do a Google search for Fintech Daydreaming and you will find us. But as always, please subscribe, hit that like button and share the podcast with just one of your friends. Help us to grow. We'll bring you more content every other week as we have been doing for the last 10 seasons. So we hope to see you again. We hope to hear from you again. Give us some feedback. And as always, this has been Fintech Daydreaming.
This is Fintech Daydreaming.